The film opens with a group of friends, Ginny, Evan, Isaac, and Sandra, having a bonfire in front of Ginny's house and sharing stories about their town's serial killer, nicknamed the Blissfield Butcher. It is popularly known that the butcher would murder teenagers every homecoming night since 1977. But worry not, he hasn't murdered anyone since the 90s, so they assure themselves that they are safe. A few moments later, Isaac and Sandra enter the house to look for some alcohol. Ginny's parents are wealthy collectors of ancient artifacts, and Isaac seems fascinated by a dagger inside a glass case. After scoping out the art collection inside, Isaac leaves Sandra and finds red wine in the basement. He then hears a strange noise and startles, breaking the bottle he's holding. And then all of a sudden, a large man appears and shoves a broken bottle down his throat, killing him. Upstairs, Sandra is just finishing up in the bathroom when someone starts pounding on the door very loudly. Right after, the killer kicks the door open, and smashes her head against the toilet seat, also killing her. Outside of the house, Ginny and Evan are arguing, when the butcher suddenly appears and kills Evan by impaling a broken tennis racket through his head. Horrified, Ginny runs inside the house, and hides in the wardrobe while the butcher looks for her. The serial killer eventually opens wardrobe, but fortunately doesn't find her, so he walks away. As it turns out, there is a secret door inside the wardrobe. After some time, Ginny sneaks out. She hears her parents pulling up at the driveway, so she makes a run for it, but the butcher ambushes her and throws her against the wall, where she gets impaled by a hanging artifact. It is now that he begins hearing whispers. It is coming from the dagger inside the glass case. He takes the dagger with him before escaping, leaving Ginny's parents screaming in horror at the sight of their daughter's dead body. The next morning we wake up with Millie, a teenager in the town of Blissfield, who lives with her alcoholic single mom, and her cop older sister, Char. The homecoming dance is around the corner, but she's decided not to go, and accompany her mom watch a play instead. At school, her friends, Joshua and Nyla, are disappointed that she isn't going to be at homecoming. Although Millie struggles with self-esteem, her friends reassure her that she is attractive. Nyla pulls her aside and lectures her on how Millie shouldn't let her father's death eternally stop her from living her life, especially because her father has been dead for a year by now. We then learn from Ryler and her friend group, that Millie endures daily passive-aggressive bullying at the hands of her schoolmates. Later in class, her woodshop teacher, Mr. Bernardi, suddenly orders her to do a presentation he assigned her earlier than she was told, and she isn't ready for it. So Bernardi just humiliates her in front of the class and her crush, Booker. Millie, as well as every other student in town, then receives an emergency alert stating that 4 of their classmates have been murdered last night, and an investigation is ongoing. But despite this, the school is still not canceling homecoming. That evening, Millie poses as the school mascot during the homecoming game, and gets bullied by a couple of football players. Seeing this, her crush Booker appears sympathetic, but he doesn't say anything. After the game, Millie finds that her mother hasn't arrived to pick her up. Her best friends offer to keep her company while she waits, but she declines the offer and decides to wait. Before they part ways, they will do their special friendship handshake. Hours go by, and Millie ends up being the last person at the stadium. Unbeknownst to her, her alcoholic mother is actually passed out on the couch from too much drinking. When her sister Char comes home from work, she immediately realizes that Millie's not home and decides to call her. Millie picks up, but her phone dies shortly after. She's now starting to get scared, even more so when the stadium lights go out. To make it even worse, she sees a man standing across from her. As he approaches, she immediately realizes that he's the butcher, and scours for the stadium. She hides under the bleachers, and tries to keep quiet while the butcher walks right above her, and peeks out to check whether the coast is clear. Not long after, she runs across the field to avoid the killer, but this time, he catches up to her and pins her down. As we take a closer look, we see that he's holding the ancient dagger from the beginning of the movie. Its gem lights up and the sky turns murky. The two are briefly transported atop an Aztec pyramid, and the butcher stabs her in the shoulder with the ancient dagger. Oddly enough, he starts bleeding from his shoulder too, just like Millie. Right on time, Char the cop sister arrives, and the panicked butcher immediately drops his dagger and bolts the scene, while Char checks up on her little sister. The dagger is taken to the police station as evidence, while Millie doesn't seem like herself. She gets taken home safely. When she goes to bed, Millie gets haunted by strange whispers muttering the word La Dola. As she wakes up the next day, she begins to feel something is off with her body, and looks around confusedly, as if seeing everything for the first time. Here we realize that she isn't Millie anymore, she is the butcher whose soul has been transported to Millie's body. Meanwhile, on the other side of the story, the real Millie wakes up in the butcher's body, and freaks the hell out. Right after, a druggie comes looking to buy drugs, so the bewildered Millie tries telling him that she is a teenage girl stuck in the body of a grown man, causing the druggie to assume she's high and beg for a share of drugs. Weirded out, Millie bolts away. Meanwhile, the butcher finally steps out of Millie's room, and devours his breakfast like a savage, confusing Millie's mom. He then picks up a kitchen knife, and moves to stab Char, but luckily, a blissfully unaware mom stops him before he gets to. When the mom starts talking about how Millie should skip school, the butcher seems intrigued, and decides to go to school that very day. At the same time, news about the butcher and a rough sketch of his face is now all over the local news, which proves to be a disadvantage for poor Millie, who is in town looking for anyone who could help her. Moreover, people give her weird looks, and a lady starts screaming while saying that she is the butcher. With no other choice, Millie runs away from the scene. That day, the school announces that due to Millie's incident last night, homecoming is cancelled for the students' safety. Little did they know, the infamous murderer is walking down their very hallway. The butcher shows up to school dressed like a baddie, turning heads and earning Millie cool points among her peers. Even the school's most popular girl, Ryler, starts talking to him out of curiosity, asking about Millie's encounter with the serial killer last night. The butcher sees this as an opportunity to get the girl alone. They head to the locker room, but after seeing how weird the butcher is acting, Ryler walks away. When she steps inside the restroom, she hears some running water, and is shocked to find a large man, aka the real Millie, taking a shower. Obviously thinking Millie is the butcher, the girl runs to the butcher for help. But he only whisks her away and throws her inside a cryotherapy machine. He locks it with a crutch, and sets the temperature far below freezing. Not long after, a freshly showered Millie stumbles upon a dead Ryler in the cryotherapy machine. When she opens the door, the body is so frozen that it shatters into a million pieces. Meanwhile, the butcher gets caught roaming the hallway, and is escorted to woodwork class. In it, he sits next to Millie's crush Booker, and sucks on his bleeding finger after he cut himself, which earns a scolding from Mr. Bernardi. On the other side of the school, Millie's two best friends are conversing in the school theater, where they always hang to skip class. They talk about how weird Millie was acting this morning, until they get interrupted by Millie, walking in the room and scaring them both. They escape into the school's kitchen, where the lunch lady also bolts in fear at the sight of Millie. All the while, Millie keeps trying to convince them that she's their friend, but of course they don't believe her. Joshua throws all kinds of items at her, but she persists. Eventually, the teenagers arm themselves with kitchen utensils and start beating Millie together, but of course she is stronger now and manages to gain the upper hand. When Joshua and Nyla are lying exhausted on the floor, she starts performing their school's cheerleading mascot routine. This prompts Joshua and Nyla to start asking her questions only Millie would know the answer to, and of course, she answers all of them perfectly, and even gets them to do their special friendship handshake. The teenagers now believe that she is Millie, so she proceeds to tell them what happened to her, and the word La Dola she kept hearing in her sleep last night. Thus, Joshua Googles La Dola, and finds a Spanish article about the glowing dagger, which they take to their Spanish teacher to translate. According to the teacher, the dagger requires a sacrifice, but if the sacrifice is not successful, the souls of the attacker and victim get swapped, and the change will be permanent within 24 hours. The only way to fix the situation is if one of them kills the other. After catching Millie up on the information they just learned, the teens suggest that they should retrieve the dagger. But Millie is reluctant to leave the school, because she knows the butcher is here, and wants to prevent him from taking more lives. She's not wrong, because the butcher steps back into the woodwork classroom to kill the teacher. He switches on the sawmill, and lunges at the teacher. The teacher successfully counters the attack, and throws the butcher on the floor. When he's about to leave the room, the butcher jumps onto his back, but once again he beats him to the ground. However, when the teacher is distracted, the butcher takes a screwdriver and stabs him in the throat. Drowsy and bleeding out, he attempts to stand up and walk away, so the butcher kicks him onto the running sawmill, and pushes him onto it, splitting his body in half. Right after, he exits the classroom and comes across two officers, who kindly pass him by because he's in Millie's body now. Conveniently, he runs into Millie and his friends next, but before they could do anything, the butcher starts pretending to be a scared teenage girl, drawing the officer's attention. This prompts the three best friends to run and escape with Joshua's car. The officers quickly radio the rest of the force to go look for Joshua's car, while just so happens, it passes by a patrolling Char, so she goes after it. The teenagers head to a department store to get Millie a disguise. They hide her in the fitting room while they look for the clothes. Not long after, Nyla returns with a Halloween mask, and Millie puts it on, though she can barely see with it on. In the meantime, Joshua stalks his friend's Instagram to try to see where the butcher's at, and discover that he's hanging out with the football players. While playing pool, the football players complain about how homecoming is cancelled, and propose that they should throw a homecoming of our own. The butcher seizes this opportunity to suggest that they should hold it at the town's old mill, which the boys agree upon. Up next, the butcher enters a spooky house, followed by Booker, who's been wondering why Millie's been acting different. As Booker looks for the butcher, the killer stalks him from behind, and is about to attack him. But then, the real Millie shows up and knocks him unconscious. Afterwards, she goes after Booker, and knocks him out too so he won't go to the police. They bring the butcher into Joshua's house and ties him in a chair, along with Booker. When he wakes up, he is understandably creeped out and moves to leave, until Millie recites a poem that she anonymously slid into his locker a few weeks ago. This gets him to finally believe who she is, and agrees to help out. With Booker on board, the four teenagers now try to come up with a plan to retrieve the dagger from the police station. Joshua is on guard duty, while the other three head to the station. After they arrive, they sit and wait in the car until the rest of the officers leave. Nyla then tells the two to wait in the car, and let her handle this. Once she gets inside, she meets Char, and immediately starts pleading for help, by saying that the butcher kidnapped her earlier in the day and she escaped, but he followed her here and is now in the back of the police station. Hearing this, Char tells her to go hide, and checks the back lot immediately. Inside the car, Booker finally reveals to Millie that he also has a crush on her. Back in Joshua's house, his mother suddenly comes home early, and asks why his best friend is tied to a chair. This prompts him to come up with a lame excuse that they're role-playing, but the mom doesn't believe him. She takes a knife and walks up to the butcher to untie him, while Joshua pleads for her not to. Getting impatient, the butcher stomps over the mom's toes, causing her to drop the dagger. And then immediately, he frees himself and starts going after them with the dagger. The two retreat to the bedroom to hide, while the butcher menacingly pounds on it, until he comes up with a better idea, and heads for the police station instead. Unfortunately, Nyla gets caught while trying to steal the dagger, causing Char to point her gun at her and force her to drop the blade. Not long after, the butcher arrives at the scene, while the real Millie sees the butcher enter the station. The butcher keeps pretending to be Millie to win Char's favor, followed by Millie's arrival. This gives the butcher the opportunity to snag the dagger and steal a police car, headed for the old mill where homecoming is taking place. Inside the station, Char holds Millie at gunpoint, and starts leading her towards a cell. Booker then comes in and distracts the cop, enabling Millie to throw Char inside the cell. Millie apologizes to her sister before the kids rush off to the mill party. The teenagers head for the homecoming party on foot, while the butcher lures a football player to go somewhere private. Once they arrive, Millie only has 13 minutes left until the body swap becomes irreversible, so Booker sets up an alarm on Millie's watch before they search for the butcher. Back to the butcher, the football player leads him to meet with two of his friends, and the three boys brag about wanting to force themselves on her. Unfortunately for the boys, the butcher isn't someone you'd want to mess with, so when one of the boys hands him a bottle, he uses it to brutally murder two of them. The one remaining boy manages to stand his ground against him, until the butcher picks up a conveniently placed chainsaw, and saws his head off. The group split up. Joshua follows a football player who claims to know where Millie is. But as it turns out, he takes him somewhere quiet, and starts making unwanted advances, until the butcher shows up and sticks a metal hook in his eye. As Joshua screams, Millie shows up and faces off against the butcher, while telling Joshua to run. At the same time, the police arrive, while Millie and the butcher get into a scuffle. Millie manages to snag the dagger, but an officer shows up and shoots it off her hand, so she takes him down before going after the butcher. With Nyla and Joshua's help, the group pin the butcher down and get ready to stab him. Unfortunately, the alarm starts to ring, marking how time has run out. Millie is now at loss for words, until Joshua reminds her that Booker always sets his alarms 5 minutes early, which means there is still time. With that, Millie goes right ahead and stabs the butcher in the heart, effectively ending the curse. At the same time, the police arrive at the scene, and immediately shoot the butcher dead. On the next scene, the butcher is being taken by an ambulance and pronounced dead, at least for now. Meanwhile, Millie is back home, cuddling with her mom, who's glad she's now safe. It seems that all is well. However, when Millie exits to the hallway, she finds the front door open. And soon after, she hears strange noises coming from the other room. When she goes to investigate, the butcher sneaks behind her, and puts a knife to her throat. Char comes to the rescue, but as it turns out, he already removed the bullets in her gun. Luckily, Mom comes in and smashes a bottle to his head, while Char charges at him and immediately starts loading her gun, but she isn't fast enough. The butcher throws the mom to the ground, followed by Char. Until lastly, the killer tells Millie how bad her life is with a dead father and a drunk mom. He then twists Millie's arm, and pins her to the ground. Millie doesn't lose hope, and retaliates by kicking him in the balls, allowing the women to overpower him. As the final blow, Millie impales him with a piece from a broken chair. And this is where the movie ends.